Salah ad-Din Yusuf ibn Ayyub, better known as Saladin, was the first Sultan of Egypt and Syria, founded the Ayyubid dynasty, and led the Muslim military campaign against the Crusader states in the Levant. Today we will tell the story of the man who unified the Muslim world. Saladin was born in 1137 at the castle of Tikrit, located between Mosul and Baghdad, part of the area known today as Iraq. Saladin's father was Najm ad-Din Ayyub, who was the ruler of Tikrit at the time. On the night Saladin was born, his father was forced to evacuate Tikrit because he had helped Zengi, a military leader, escape from a pursuit. This enraged a superior officer. Saladin's family eventually arrived in Damascus, which was the capital of what is now known as Syria. From a young age, Saladin demonstrated leadership abilities and was educated in Greek philosophy, mathematics, poetry, astronomy, and most importantly, he became a student of the Quran and theology. He joined the army at the age of 14 and was trained by his uncle Asad ad-Din Shirkuh, who was a prominent military commander in Damascus. Saladin's performance quickly impressed his mentor, leading him to take on leadership roles in military campaigns. In the following years, he distinguished himself by his dedication, leadership, intelligence, and loyalty to his leaders. During the First Crusade, in the late 11th century, European Christians established control over several kingdoms in the Holy Land, most notably the Principality of Antioch and the Kingdom of Jerusalem. Because of this, there was an urgent need for the Islamic world in the Middle East to become more militarily capable, and the rudiments of military command that Saladin was acquiring at that time would prove very useful in the years and decades to come. Since its founding in the 6th century, Islam had spread rapidly through various caliphates, which were, in essence, areas of the Muslim world that pledged allegiance to religious leaders or caliphs. The First Crusade was called in response to the growing advance of the Seljuk Empire over territories held by the Byzantine Empire in Anatolia. At the time of Saladin's birth, the Seljuk Empire, of Turkish origin, dominated much of the Middle East, while the Fatimid dynasty ruled Egypt and eastern North Africa. Saladin was of Turkish origin and spent his childhood within the borders of an area in present-day northern Iraq, which was governed by the Zengid dynasty, but the overall control of this area was still in the hands of the Seljuk Empire, as Zengid Syria was a vassal of the Seljuk Empire, and the ruler of Syria at the time was Emir Nur ad-Din. Most of the events in Saladin's life and destiny, however, would take place further south of his birthplace, in present-day Iraq, Egypt, and the Holy Land, where he would found a new dynasty in his own name and change the course of history in the Middle East and beyond. In 1163, the vizier, or political ruler, of the Egyptian Fatimid Caliph Al-Adid, a man named Shawar, was expelled from Egypt by a rival named Durgam after a power struggle between them. Shawar then asked the ruler of Syria, Nur ad-Din, to help him regain power. He agreed in exchange for an alliance against the Crusaders and sent his general, Shirkuh, along with the young 26-year-old Saladin, to intervene in Egypt. The expedition was successful, and Shawar was reinstated as vizier, but Shirkuh refused to withdraw his forces from the region, even after the vizier offered 30,000 dinars for the service of his army. Subsequently, the leader of Syria, Nur ad-Din, exploited the weakness of the Fatimids in Egypt to his advantage and took de facto control of the country, effectively making Shirkuh the ruler in Egypt and allowing the annexation of the territory by the Zengids. Another source of tension arose because the Fatimids in Egypt were Shia Muslims, who believed that their rulers should be chosen from the direct descendants of the Prophet Muhammad, while the Zengids in Syria were Sunni Muslims, including Saladin, who believed that Muhammad's successors should be chosen by the community of his followers. Shawar felt betrayed by Shirkuh and the Sunni Syrian forces that remained in his country and appealed to the Christian king in Jerusalem, Amalric I, to intervene. This resulted in the union of Shawar's and Amalric's forces, who besieged Shirkuh in the city of Bilbais. However, Shirkuh and Saladin's leader in Syria, Nur ad-Din, moved his own forces against the Crusader state of Antioch and captured the Count of Tripoli, Raymond III, at the Battle of Hattin in 1164. Before this, Saladin had played only a minor military role in the siege of Bilbais, though he would soon rise to legendary status in the service of Nur ad-Din. Tripoli was a crusader state, but also a vassal of Jerusalem at the time, which meant that Amalric and his forces had to rush north to assist Raymond and protect their northern borders against Syria. Shirkuh also evacuated his forces north to Syria to aid his master, meaning the Fatimid dynasty and Shawar remained in power for the time being. However, in 1166, Shirkuh and Saladin returned once again to regain control of Egypt, leading Shawar to call upon King Amalric to help him fight them. Since Amalric's naval forces controlled the eastern Mediterranean, he had the initial advantage and managed to reach Cairo and unite forces with Shawar and the Fatimids before Shirkuh and Saladin could arrive in the area by land. This resulted in the Battle of Al-Babain, in which Saladin commanded the right wing of the Zengid Syrian forces. The battle was bloody and inconclusive. Eventually, the Syrians attempted to escape Egypt through the port of Alexandria, but were blocked by Amalric's fleet. Thus, Shirkuh and Saladin agreed to a truce and left Egypt, on the condition that King Amalric would do the same. This benefited Shawar and the Fatimids, who remained in power, and also benefited Amalric, who maintained a weak but friendly neighbour in Egypt. However, Amalric made a critical mistake that would ultimately be fatal to his ambitions of controlling Egypt and to the success of the Crusades as a whole. Instead of continuing to support Fatimid Egypt, he chose to invade it in 1168, taking the city of Bilbao and massacring its inhabitants. In desperation, Shawar switched sides again and appealed to Nur ad-Din in Syria for help. This led Nur ad-Din to once again dispatch his great general, Shirkuh, to Egypt. Facing enemies both ahead and behind him, Amalric was forced to retreat to Jerusalem. Shirkuh then marched to Cairo unopposed, and the Fatimid Caliph al-Adid ordered the execution of Shawar for his treachery. Shirkuh replaced Shawar as vizier, and the de facto Zengid Syrian control over Egypt began. In early 1169, the army of Amalric I, king of Jerusalem, was finally expelled from Egypt. Saladin's uncle, Shirkuh, was appointed vizier to the Fatimid Caliph al-Adid, giving Nur ad-Din de facto control over Egypt. But just a month later, in March 1169, Shirkuh suddenly died after a brief illness. Without his right hand, Nur ad-Din's influence in Egypt was threatened. Al-Adid saw an opportunity to strengthen his position and quickly appointed Saladin as vizier, thinking that a young man without political power would be easy to control. However, the 31-year-old proved to be more than Al-Adid had anticipated. As the new vizier, Saladin took advantage of the Fatimid political system and, with clever tactics, gradually placed his relatives in key positions within the government and the army, consolidating his power enough to overthrow and dissolve the Shia Fatimid Caliphate in just 2 years, in 1171, thereby founding the Ayyubid dynasty. Saladin then strengthened Egypt as a bastion of Sunni Muslim power, governing in the name of Nur ad-Din. He revitalized the economy, established civic institutions, and significantly improved education by building a law college in Alexandria and several schools throughout Egypt, attracting many scholars from Asia and Europe. He abolished fees for Muslim pilgrims crossing the Red Sea and compensated Mecca for any loss of revenue, becoming popular among the people and a patron of Mecca. Saladin transformed Egypt into a base against the Crusaders by creating a new army loyal only to him, and began rebuilding the navy to protect Egypt's coasts. He launched military incursions to expand the borders, first against Nubia, where hostile remnants of the Fatimid establishment persisted, and then in Libya, where Ayyubid forces expelled the Norman occupiers from Tripoli, though Saladin never succeeded in consolidating his authority west of the province of Barca. More importantly, Saladin focused on controlling the Hejaz and captured Yemen, gaining control over the Red Sea and its vast commercial potential, greatly increasing Egypt's trade wealth. Saladin was actively building an empire, which created friction with Nur ad-Din, his master in Syria. Tensions escalated and nearly resulted in conflict, but Nur ad-Din suddenly died in 1174, likely of a heart attack. In the ensuing power vacuum, his 11-year-old son, As-Salih, was unable to fill the void left by his father's death. But Saladin could, and he saw before him a grand vision. He could unite Egypt and Syria for a holy war against the Christian invaders. He proclaimed the need for unity and jihad as reasons to intervene in Syria. And his claims were not unfounded. By controlling the Red Sea and reclaiming the area south of Sharbat Castle, Saladin was already recognized as the liberator of the Hajj route. Securing the pilgrimage routes from Sudan and Egypt to the holy cities of Mecca and Medina gave him much credibility, and as a result, his arrival in Syria was well received by the common people, though not so much by some members of the Zengid dynasty. Even so, Saladin brought most of the Zengid territory under his control, either through diplomacy or military intervention, becoming the Sultan of Egypt and Syria. Meanwhile, across the border, King Amalric I of Jerusalem planned to exploit the political instability in Syria and expand his territory, but he died of dysentery in July 1174. In Saladin's view, the death of Amalric was a sign of God's favour, with the throne passing to Baldwin IV, a boy suffering from leprosy, and the Frankish nobles competing for positions in the kingdom. The threat of a major Christian invasion diminished, but Saladin knew that it was not yet the right time to fight the Crusaders, as he needed to consolidate his position against Nur ad-Din's relatives, who still pose a threat from their bases in Aleppo and Mosul. As Baldwin IV matured, the kingdom adopted a proactive foreign policy. The Crusaders attempted to take Hama and Harim, but failed. In 1177, Saladin responded by leading a large invasion force into the Kingdom of Jerusalem to curb Frankish aggression. Baldwin, now 16 years old, despite being greatly outnumbered, proved to be a capable leader, uniting his nobles against the Muslim threat. With the help of Reynald of Châtillon, his second-in-command, he managed to surprise Saladin at Montgisard due to a rare tactical error by the Sultan. Resources to follow up on the victory, and the Sultan managed to regroup. In April 1179, Saladin counterattacked and decisively defeated Baldwin in the Golan region, nearly capturing the king. Another Christian army was defeated in June of the same year, and just 2 months later, an important Templar fortress located on the pilgrimage route was destroyed. In Ali, in 1180, Saladin and Baldwin agreed to a 2-year truce. But even before the ink dried, it was clear that the imposing fortress of Kerak would become the next point of conflict. Practically impregnable on top of a steep hill, with its 80-metre entrance tunnel and walls thick enough to withstand siege weapons, Kerak was the home of Reynald of Châtillon. His fortress lay on the main road between Damascus and Mecca, and from there the baron could tax, plunder, and rob the camel caravans of merchants and pilgrims. Reynald believed that Muslims should not travel freely. In the summer of 1181, he led a deep raid into Arabia, intercepted a large Muslim caravan, robbed the travellers, and captured many prisoners. Saladin demanded compensation from King Baldwin, but the king could not compel Reynald to comply. So Saladin held a group of Christian pilgrims hostage in Damietta as a form of pressure, but Reynald still refused to release the Muslim prisoners. As a result, the Christian pilgrims were sold into slavery. In 1182, Reynald further aggravated the fragile truce by sending troops across the Red Sea, threatening to destroy the Kaaba and exhume the Prophet's tomb in Hejaz. However, thanks to Saladin's naval reforms, Egypt was prepared. Al-Adil, Saladin's brother and governor of Egypt, dispatched the Ayyubid fleet, which captured and executed most of the Christian invaders. Saladin was praised throughout the Muslim community as a protector of Islamic holy sites and pilgrimage routes. In 1183, the tide turned in favour of the Muslims. Aleppo surrendered to Saladin, making him the most powerful ruler in the Muslim world and the leader of a unified front against the Crusaders. With uncontested authority over Egypt and Syria, he was supported by the Sunni Caliph in Baghdad and recognized as the Lord of Arabia and the patron of Mecca and Medina. Ordinary Muslims celebrated the unity of Islam under Saladin. The news of Aleppo's conquest shocked the Crusader states. Saladin could now focus his resources on pressuring the Kingdom of Jerusalem along its entire border. He launched devastating attacks on Christian lands and several probing assaults on the fortress of Kerak, testing the Franks' resolve and straining their resources. The situation worsened for the Crusaders with the death of Baldwin IV. The king's final act was to seek peace by sending Raymond of Tripoli to negotiate a 4-year truce, which Saladin accepted due to his own issues with the Zengid ruler in Mosul, who was forming a coalition against him. Baldwin IV's successor, Baldwin V, a sickly child, died a year later, triggering a succession crisis. After the political turmoil, Baldwin IV's sister crowned her husband, Guy de Lusignan, as King of Jerusalem. However, the new king struggled to control his noble vassals, and disturbing news arrived from the south. In the following years, the Crusader armies and Saladin's forces faced off, each waiting for the other to make a mistake. Then in 1187, one of Guy de Lusignan's followers, a knight named Reynald of Châtillon, attacked a Muslim caravan despite a truce between the Crusaders and Saladin. Some sources claim that the Sultan's own sister was violated during the attack, leading Saladin to vow to kill Châtillon. The Sultan sent his son with a small army to attack the area around Acre, resulting in a significant victory at the Battle of Cresson. Saladin then besieged the city of Tiberias, provoking the more aggressive members of Guy de Lusignan's entourage to advise the king to confront Saladin in open battle. Despite his own wife being trapped in Tiberias, Raymond of Tripoli advised Guy not to engage the Muslims, but Guy ignored this and gathered the Crusader forces, which numbered around 20,000 soldiers, including 1,200 knights. Saladin also gathered a massive force of about 30,000 soldiers and cavalry, hoping to provoke a response from the Crusaders with his incursions into their territory. After holding a war council, the Crusaders decided to leave their supply base at La Saforie and attack Saladin at Tiberias. Along the way, the Crusaders were continuously harassed by Muslim archers, and Saladin's forces positioned themselves between the Crusaders and the local water sources. Within a few days, the army was demoralized, dying of thirst, while Saladin's forces were regularly supplied with water from Lake Tiberias. Then, on July 4th, 1187, under the cover of a smokescreen caused by the Muslim army burning dry grass around the Crusaders, Saladin formed his forces. What followed was not a battle but a massacre, as by this time the Crusader army was mad with thirst, exhausted from the long march under the sun, and demoralized by the flames, smoke, and constant skirmishes. Instead of forming a battle line and focusing on attacking the Muslims, the Crusader army was more concerned with reaching Lake Tiberias for water. This resulted in the complete collapse of the army as an organized force, and many fled when they could, while the remaining were forced to beg the Muslims for death, or offer any fragile defense with the little energy they had left. After a series of increasingly desperate charges, the Crusaders were forced to retreat, and Guy de Lusignan himself was captured. Thus, the Battle of Hattin was an apocalyptic disaster for the Christians, with only about 3,000 nobles, knights, and soldiers surviving the encounter. After the battle, Guy de Lusignan and Reynald de Châtillon, along with other high-ranking nobles, were brought to Saladin's tent. The Sultan offered a drink to Guy, a sign that he would be spared, but instead of accepting the gesture, Guy handed the drink to Reynald. Saladin then took it from Châtillon's hand, declaring that he had not offered the drink to him. What happened next varies according to sources. Some say that Saladin beheaded Reynald with a single sword strike, while others say he merely struck him, which was a signal for his guards to execute him immediately. Either way, both Reynald and all the high-ranking nobles in the Crusader army were beheaded, along with the captured Templar and Hospitaller knights. Guy assumed he would be next, but Saladin spared him, stating that kings do not kill kings. He was taken as a prisoner to Damascus, but was released by Saladin in 1187. Saladin's forces then took each Crusader fortress one by one, as there was no strong enough army to oppose them. Saladin's goal was to take Jerusalem without conflict, as a prolonged battle for the city would endanger the lives of the Muslims living within its walls, and also risk the destruction of the Muslim holy sites. The defenders, led by Queen Sibylla and Balian of Ibelin, knew this, but they also knew that they would be massacred or enslaved if the city was taken by force. Therefore, terms were eventually agreed upon for the occupants of Jerusalem to leave the city unharmed in exchange for a small ransom per head to be paid to the Sultan. However, the money raised was enough to pay for the freedom of only about 18,000 of the city's 30,000 inhabitants, and the remainder were taken as slaves, while the few fortunate ones made their way to the coastal city of Tyre, which was the last stronghold held by the Christians in the Holy Land. The fall of Jerusalem shocked all of Europe, and it is said that Pope Urban III collapsed and died upon hearing the news of the defeat. The new Pope, Gregory VIII, declared that the capture of Jerusalem was a punishment for the sins of Christendom, and issued a call to arms across the continent. The Holy Roman Emperor, Frederick Barbarossa, after whom the German invasion of the Soviet Union was later named, then raised an army and advanced through Anatolia towards the Holy Land, but while crossing a river, his horse slipped, and the elderly king drowned. The new King of England, Richard I, then sought to raise an army himself, taking the cross and joining the Crusades, uniting with King Philip II of France. Meanwhile, Guy de Lusignan, who had been released by Saladin, returned to Tyre and gathered an army with which he besieged the city of Acre. But for 2 long years, neither side could achieve a decisive victory over the other. In June 1191, Richard I arrived at Acre with an army of 17,000 men, reinforcing the Crusader forces and consolidating their control over the city. Richard brought prefabricated siege engines, which were deployed against the walls of Acre, but Saladin countered with Greek fire, destroying them. Richard motivated his men with gold to dismantle the base of a tower, leading to its collapse, and the capture of the city by the Crusaders in July 1191. Along with nearly 3,000 prisoners, Richard attempted to negotiate the release of these prisoners in exchange for money and the True Cross, but after some nobles were not released, he ordered the execution of all the Muslim prisoners, which led Saladin to do the same with his Christian prisoners. Realizing that he could not capture Jerusalem without securing Jaffa, Richard moved south in August 1191, keeping his army supplied by sea. Saladin followed and harassed the Crusaders until December 7th, 1191, when he attacked. The Crusaders held their formation despite provocations until the Knights Hospitaller charged. Richard then used his heavy cavalry to flank the Muslims, securing a victory at the Battle of Arsuf. He occupied Jaffa and advanced towards Jerusalem, but internal divisions and stretched supply lines forced the Crusaders to retreat. Saladin later attacked Jaffa but was defeated, leading to peace negotiations and the Treaty of Jaffa, which established a 3-year truce and allowed Christian pilgrims to visit Jerusalem. Richard left the Holy Land in October 1192, ending the Third Crusade. Although Saladin retained most of his conquests, including Jerusalem, he died 6 months later in Damascus on March 4th, 1193. Known for his generosity, Saladin gave away most of his wealth, leaving insufficient funds for his funeral. He was buried in the Umayyad Mosque in Damascus, where his tomb remains to this day. Saladin's rise from obscurity to become the most powerful leader in the Muslim world, and possibly in the world until Genghis Khan, prevented the Crusaders from gaining greater control over the Holy Land. His unification of Egypt and Syria helped to resist the Mongol invasion. Saladin's legacy is evident in the state flag of Egypt and the national emblems of Iraq, Somaliland, and Yemen. Although both sides committed atrocities during the Crusades, Saladin is remembered as a brilliant military commander and leader, crucial in the defeat of the Crusaders, and is revered in both the Christian and Muslim worlds. What are your thoughts on Saladin? Was he simply fortunate to capitalize on the weaknesses of the Crusader states, or was he one of the greatest leaders of the Islamic world, uniting Islam against the Christian invaders and reclaiming Jerusalem? Share your opinions in the comments section, and thank you for watching.